The snow began falling just before sunset on Christmas Eve, light and playful at first. The inn, nestled deep in the heart of Vermont's snow-draped mountains, stood resilient against the growing storm. The Frosthaven Inn, as it was called, was one of those old-world relics, creaky wooden floors, fireplaces in every room, and a faint scent of cedar lingering in the air. For Abigail, the inn's owner, it was her sanctuary, her life's work, and for the past few years, her lonely solace. Abigail had inherited the inn from her grandparents, who had always kept its history shrouded in mystery. But there was one story she could never forget. "Spirits don't like the cold," her grandmother used to say, "and this place has seen plenty of bitter winters." Abigail would always laugh it off as folklore. Tonight, though, as the blizzard turned the world outside into a swirling white void, those words seemed to take on an ominous weight. The inn was supposed to be quiet this Christmas, but plans changed when the storm rolled in. By mid-afternoon, travelers who had braved the mountain roads began seeking refuge. There was Mr. and Mrs. Harper, an elderly couple heading to visit their grandchildren. Simon, a young man traveling alone with a duffel bag and a distracted air about him. And the Parkers, a family of 4 whose holiday road trip had gone terribly awry. Abigail welcomed them with hot cocoa and reassurances that the storm would pass by morning. By nightfall, the snow had turned relentless. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the old windows of the inn. Abigail, now flustered, moved between the kitchen and the guests, offering warm meals and blankets. Yet, something about the storm, or perhaps the inn itself, made everyone uneasy. Simon lingered by the fireplace, staring into the flames with a distant look. The Harper couple whispered to one another, their voices tinged with concern. Even the usually cheerful Parker kids were unusually quiet, clinging to their parents on the worn leather sofa. "Do you ever feel like—" Simon spoke suddenly, startling Abigail as she passed by with a tray of cookies. "Like something's watching you here." Abigail froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "Old places have their quirks," she said lightly. "The wind plays tricks on the mind." Simon didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the fire, but his expression had darkened. As the clock struck midnight, the storm outside seemed to intensify, as if the very heavens were angry. The guests had retreated to their rooms, but sleep didn't come easily. Abigail lay awake in her small quarters behind the front desk, listening to the eerie symphony of wind and creaking wood. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the inn, followed by what sounded like a faint sob. Heart-pounding, Abigail grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the dim hallway. The old walls seemed to close in around her, their shadows stretching like grasping hands. She found the source of the noise outside the Harper's room. Mr. Harper stood in the doorway, his face pale as he clutched his wife's trembling hand. "There was someone in our room," he whispered. Abigail's blood ran cold. "That's not possible. All the other guests are accounted for." Mrs. Harper shook her head vehemently. "It wasn't one of the guests. It was a woman." She was crying. Before Abigail could respond, another sound cut through the air, a sharp, anguished wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was followed by a chilling silence. "Everyone downstairs now," Abigail ordered, her voice trembling. The guests gathered in the parlor, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Abigail tried to steady her nerves as she lit more candles, but the shadows they cast seemed to dance with malevolence. "What's going on?" Mr. Parker demanded. "This place is wrong." Abigail hesitated, then sighed. "This inn is old. It's seen a lot of history. Some say," she paused, feeling the weight of her grandmother's warnings. "Some say it's haunted." Simon's head snapped up. "By who?" "A long time ago, during another storm, a woman named Eleanor stayed here," Abigail explained. She was running from something or someone. No one knows exactly. But she never left. They found her frozen in her room the next morning, her face twisted in terror. Since then, strange things have happened whenever there's a storm. The room fell silent. The wind outside seemed to mock them, shrieking louder as if it carried Eleanor's ghostly cries. The tension broke when the youngest Parker child, Lily, suddenly screamed. She pointed to the window, where a pale face with hollow eyes stared back at them before vanishing into the storm. Panic erupted. Mr. Parker tried to calm his family while Mrs. Hopper clutched her rosary. Simon, however, seemed strangely calm. "She's here," he said softly. "She's always been here." Abigail rounded on him. "What do you know?" Simon hesitated, then confessed. "I didn't come here by accident. I've been researching this place. Eleanor's story. It's connected to my family. My great-grandfather was the man she was running from." A collective gasp filled the room. "I thought if I came here, I could. I don't know." "Apologize? Make things right?" Simon's voice cracked. "But she doesn't want forgiveness. She wants vengeance." As if summoned by his words, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept along the windows, and the fire in the hearth extinguished itself with a hiss. The guest's breath came out in visible puffs as a figure materialized in the center of the room. It was Eleanor. Her translucent form was both beautiful and horrifying, her face etched with sorrow and rage. She fixed her hollow eyes on Simon, who fell to his knees trembling. "Why?" she whispered, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Why did you let me die?" "I wasn't there," Simon stammered. "I wasn't even born yet." "Please, I'm trying to help you." Eleanor's form flickered, and for a moment her sorrow seemed to outweigh her anger. "You can't undo what's been done, but we can't go on like this," Abigail interjected, her voice firm despite her fear. "What do you want, Eleanor? What will give you peace?" Eleanor turned to her, and for a moment the room was deathly silent. Then she spoke a single word. "Remember?" Guided by Eleanor, Abigail uncovered a hidden journal buried beneath the end's floorboards. It belonged to Eleanor and detailed her final days, her escape from Simon's great-grandfather, her hope for sanctuary at the inn, and her ultimate despair when she realized she'd been found. The journal ended with a chilling line, "I will not rest until my story is told." Abigail read the journal aloud to the guests, her voice breaking with emotion. As she finished, Eleanor's form softened, her ghostly features giving way to something almost human. She looked at Simon, then Abigail, and finally, the storm outside began to abate. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for the next stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. It was Christmas Eve, and Melanie sat by the living room window of her small house, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. The glow of colored lights from the Christmas tree reflected in the frosty windowpane, but the festive atmosphere failed to lift her spirits. It had been 6 months since her younger brother Daniel had passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. This was the first Christmas without him, and the grief was still raw. Melanie's hand brushed against the faded photograph on the side table. It was a picture of her and Daniel as kids, their cheeks dusted with powdered sugar from baking cookies. She smiled faintly, her chest tightening at the memory. Daniel had always loved Christmas. He'd go out of his way to make it special for everyone, decorating the tree, wrapping gifts with an almost obsessive attention to detail, and blasting Christmas carols until everyone joined in the fun. You always made everything brighter, Melanie whispered to the photo. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Just as she was about to retreat to the kitchen to distract herself with baking, there was a knock at the door. Melanie frowned. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. The snow outside muffled everything, making the knock feel strangely loud. She hesitated before opening it, but when she did, there was no one there. Only the swirling snow greeted her. She glanced down and noticed an envelope on the doorstep. It was old-fashioned, with thick, cream-colored paper, and her name was written on it in handwriting that made her heart stop. It was Daniel's. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She turned it over and saw the wax seal, a tiny snowflake imprint. This was impossible. Melanie carried the envelope inside and sat down on the couch, staring at it for what felt like hours. The rational part of her brain screamed that it couldn't be real, but the writing, the seal, everything about it was so unmistakably Daniel. Finally, she opened it. The letter inside was written on stationery she recognized from his old desk, a simple piece of paper bordered with tiny holly leaves. She unfolded it carefully, the scent of cedar wood and pine wafting up a scent that reminded her of him. The letter read, "Dear Meli, I know you're missing me right now, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving so soon, and I'm sorry for the hole I've left behind. But I wanted you to know I'm still here in some way. Christmas was always our thing, wasn't it? I'm writing this because I need you to know something important, something I never said enough when I was alive. You made my life better, Mel. You made everything better. There's a box upstairs in the attic that I want you to find. You'll know it when you see it. I hope it brings you some comfort this Christmas. I love you, sis. Always, Daniel." The air seemed to leave the room as Melanie finished reading. She pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming freely now. Her brother's voice was so vivid in those words that she could almost hear him speaking. "This has to be a prank," she murmured, though she didn't believe it. The handwriting was identical. The scent, it was him. Her heart pounded as she made her way upstairs to the attic. The attic was cold and dimly lit, filled with the clutter of years gone by. Melanie used her phone's flashlight to navigate through the space, her breath visible in the frigid air. She searched for a while, moving dusty boxes and forgotten holiday decorations, until she saw it, a wooden box, small and unassuming, with Daniel's name carved into the lid. She knelt down, her fingers tracing the letters. She didn't remember ever seeing this box before. Carefully, she opened it. Inside were items that made her heart ache and swell all at once. A bundle of letters, old Christmas cards, and a few small trinkets they'd exchanged over the years, a friendship bracelet she'd made for him as a child, a tiny snow globe he'd given her, a pair of concert tickets they'd never used. On top of the pile was a cassette tape labeled Christmas Memories. Daniel had always been the one to record their Christmas mornings on his old tape recorder. She hadn't heard those recordings in years. She took the tape downstairs to her father's vintage cassette player. As the tape began to play, her living room filled with the sound of Daniel's laughter, their parents' voices, and the familiar chaos of Christmas mornings past. Melanie cried as she listened to their younger selves joking and unwrapping presents, their mother scolding them for eating too many cookies before breakfast. Then came a part she didn't recognize. "Hey, Mel," Daniel's voice said suddenly, clearer than the rest. Melanie froze. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I know it's weird, but I had this idea a while ago, kind of a just-in-case thing. I wanted to leave something behind for you. You know, something to remind you that no matter what happens, I'm still your big brother. I'm still with you." Melanie's hand flew to her mouth. "I've left some memories in that box for you. Good ones. Don't let the bad stuff drown them out, okay? And one more thing, live your life. Mel, don't let grief steal it from you. I'll be watching out for you. I promise." The tape ended abruptly, leaving Melanie in stunned silence. She clutched the cassette player, her chest heaving with sobs. She didn't know how he'd managed to record such a message, or how it had found its way to her. But it didn't matter. She felt his presence, as if he were sitting beside her. As the night wore on, Melanie found herself feeling lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her. She put the items from the box on the mantel, a small shrine to her brother, and spent the rest of the evening reminiscing over the letters and trinkets. It wasn't until later, as she was locking up for the night, that she noticed footprints in the snow leading up to her door. She hadn't seen them earlier. They were larger than hers, and the pattern was familiar, a pair of boots Daniel used to wear. The prints led to the doorstep, then stopped abruptly. Her heart raced. She stepped outside, peering into the darkness. "Daniel," she called softly. The snow fell in heavy silence. There was no one there, but as she turned to go back inside, she caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A figure stood at the edge of the yard, half shrouded by falling snow. She squinted, her breath hitching. The figure raised a hand in a slow wave before fading into the shadows. The next morning, Melanie woke to a strange sense of peace. As she made her coffee, she noticed a new ornament hanging on the tree. It was a tiny angel, one she didn't remember putting there. Tucked into the branches was a note. "I told you I'd still be here. Merry Christmas, Mel." Her eyes welled up as she smiled. For the first time since Daniel's passing, she felt ready to face the day. The grief was still there, but now it was joined by something else, a profound sense of love that transcended even death. And as she sat by the tree, the angel glinting in the morning light, Melanie whispered, "Merry Christmas, Daniel. I love you too." The first snow of December fell gently over Maplewood, a quaint town known for its festive cheer and neighborly warmth. For Maggie Carter, this year's holiday season was meant to be a fresh start. It was her first Christmas without her mother, who had passed away 6 months earlier. Her grief was still raw, but she wanted to make the season special for her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. "Mom, do we have to use Grandma's old tree?" Lily asked, her small hands clutching a box of ornaments. Maggie smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Yes, sweetheart. This tree has been in our family for years. It's tradition. The tree, an artificial behemoth with tangled branches and a dusty scent, had been stored in the attic since Maggie was a child." As they unboxed it, the memories of Christmases past flooded back. Her mother humming carols in the kitchen, her father's deep laugh as he lifted her to place the star on top. But those warm memories were tainted by the growing distance between her parents before her father disappeared one night without a trace. Maggie was just 10 years old. The tree was heavy and cumbersome, its branches shedding bits of fake snow as they unfolded it. As Maggie struggled to attach the top section, she noticed something unusual. A foul odor wafted from the tree, faint but unmistakable. "What's that smell?" Lily wrinkled her nose. Maggie frowned, dismissing it as the scent of old storage. "Probably just mildew. Let's open a window." They continued decorating, draping lights and ornaments over the branches. As they worked, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The tree seemed heavier than she remembered, and the smell grew worse with each passing hour. That night, after Lily went to bed, Maggie sat by the fire, sipping tea and gazing at the tree. Her mother had insisted on keeping it for sentimental reasons, but Maggie never understood why. It was old, worn, and hardly festive anymore. Yet, as she stared, a memory surfaced, her mother's frantic shouting the night her father vanished. "You don't get to walk away from this," her mother had screamed. The details of that night were hazy, But Maggie remembered waking up to police cars outside their home and her mother's tear-streaked face as she told Maggie that her father had left them. Shaking off the memory, Maggie decided to take a closer look at their eye. The odor had intensified, and she noticed something strange about the base. The metal stand seemed rusted, and there was a dark, sticky residue beneath it. She knelt down, using her phone's flashlight to inspect it. That's when she saw it, something protruding from the hollow trunk of the artificial tree. It was small and white, and at first she thought it was a broken piece of plastic. But as she tugged at it, her breath hitched. It wasn't plastic, it was bone. The police arrived within the hour, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the snow-covered yard. Maggie held Lily close as officers dismantled the tree, carefully extracting what turned out to be a human skeleton stuffed into the hollow trunk. The remains were wrapped in tattered fabric as though someone had tried to conceal them. Detective Harris, a grizzled man with kind eyes, approached Maggie. "We'll need to run tests, but given the age of the tree and the state of the remains, this could date back decades." Maggie's mind raced. Decades. Her father's disappearance, the arguments, her mother's refusal to ever let go of the tree. Could it be? "Do you think it's him?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling. Harris hesitated. "We'll know soon enough." The days that followed were a whirlwind of media attention and police investigations. Maggie struggled to shield Lily from the growing speculation. Neighbors whispered, reporters camped outside, and the entire town seemed fixated on the mystery of the Carter family tree. When the DNA results came back, they confirmed what Maggie had feared. The remains belonged to her father, Richard Carter. The coroner's report indicated blunt force trauma to the skull, ruling the death a homicide. Maggie felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. The father she had idolized as a child, whose absence had shaped her entire life, had been there all along, and her mother had known. She must have. Maggie visited her mother's grave the next day, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger and sorrow. The snow crunched underfoot as she knelt by the headstone, tracing her mother's name with trembling fingers. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Why did you keep this secret?" There was no answer, only the cold wind rustling through the bare trees. But as Maggie sat there, a memory surfaced. Her mother's voice, soft and broken during one of their rare heart-to-heart conversations. "Sometimes we do terrible things to protect the ones we love," her mother had said, staring into her tea as though lost in a distant world. Had her mother killed her father? Was it self-defense? An accident? Maggie would never know the full truth. But as she pieced together the fragments of her childhood, a chilling realization dawned on her. Her mother had lived with this secret for years, carrying the weight of guilt and grief. Every Christmas she had unpacked that tree, knowing what lay hidden within. Maggie decided to sell the house. It was too full of ghosts, too heavy with unanswered questions. But before she left, she found a box in the attic labeled Richard in her mother's handwriting. Inside were photographs, love letters, and a worn leather journal. The entries painted a picture of a man who was both loving and deeply troubled. One entry stood out. December 23, 1987. He came home drunk again. Lily was asleep. Thank God, he's not the man I married. I'm scared of what he might do, but I can't leave. Not yet. Not until I know she'll be safe. The journal didn't answer all of Maggie's questions, but it offered glimpses of the fear and desperation her mother must have felt. Maggie's anger softened into something more complicated, a bittersweet empathy for a woman who had made unimaginable choices to protect her child. As Christmas approached, Maggie and Lily moved into a new house, a cozy bungalow on the other side of town. They bought a fresh, real tree this time, its pine scent filling the air. As they decorated it together, Maggie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Mom, "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa are together now?" Lily asked, her innocent eyes searching Maggie's face. Maggie paused, her throat tightening. "I think so, sweetheart, and I think they're watching over us." Lily smiled, placing a handmade angel on one of the branches. "Then let's make this the best Christmas ever for them." Maggie nodded, pulling her daughter into a hug. The past still haunted her, but it no longer defined her. This Christmas wasn't about the ghosts of what was lost. It was about the love that remained and the hope of what could be. And as the snow fell softly outside, the warm glow of the tree light seemed to whisper promises of healing and new beginnings. But in the attic of the old house, long since emptied and sold, a faint smell lingered, a reminder that some secrets never fully fade away.